Chapter 13, A Dash to Remagen. Bridge over River Rhine. Subtitle, Race Against Time and Enemy. Orders received at the 9th Infantry Division headquarters on March 5th or 6th, 1945, were to proceed with maximum speed across part of the plains of Cologne toward the town of Remagen. Army intelligence had learned that German army units were seen withdrawing in large numbers over the only bridge intact spanning the Rhine River. From our U.S. pilot's view, flying over the scene, it must have resembled a giant funnel covering many square miles that narrowed down to a small orifice east to cross the Rhine, hoping to avoid being trapped and to hold what proved to be their only remaining formidable line of defense. They were in a hectic scramble to prevent being destroyed or captured by American troops, forcing them to withdraw. The bridge now had become the only conventional means of advancing U.S. Army troops. Hitler's desperate strategy counted on this natural obstacle, directing all his forces in that theater to retreat to the east side of the river and to stop the Americans at all costs. When it became evident that their troops would be unable to hold back the great movement of American armor and infantry, orders from the German High Command directed that the bridge be blown up, leaving those German soldiers still not across the river to surrender or die fighting on the west side. Next subtitle is Steeped by Action. If the American units arrived before all the German personnel were situated on the east bank, those Germans who would be left knew that the bridge nevertheless was to be destroyed, and they would be stranded and sacrificed by the Nazi regime. Borrowing from a description coined by Ross Perot, there was a figuratively giant sucking sound as countless numbers of German soldiers and armor and artillery poured onto the bridge to save themselves and to fight another day. Across the scenic river settings, we saw a mass of Germans lined along the riverbank, randomly firing machine guns and rifles at the Americans, crowding the approach to the bridge on our side of the river. Advanced units of the 9th Armored Division, 9th Armored, reached Remagen shortly before my reconnaissance patrol arrived at the north edge of town. As a regular operating procedure, the 9th Recon was there in advance of the rest of our 9th Infantry Division. White flags were displayed from upper floor windows as we patrolled into the north residential section of Remagen. The possibility of an ambush made us extra cautious, having learned on other occasions that the mission could end in an enemy trap. Subtitle, One More Prisoner. Though we advanced in a fully alert mode, when looking back on the street that our foot patrol had just traveled, we saw, to our surprise, two men at some distance coming toward us. The one in front was a civilian, perhaps a farmer, carrying a burp gun cradled in his arms, and the second man was in uniform, that of an Unteroffizier, non-commissioned officer. He held his hands behind his head to indicate that he wanted to surrender. Without any hesitation and foolhardily, I told my buddies to cover me as I ran toward the two men shouting, "Halt!" determined to get my first war trophy. Directed the soldier to remove his belt with the holster, and the prize that had compelled me to be so bold. That was the German 9mm pistol, 38 millimeter, or 9mm. P-38 is what they called it. The Germans called it P-38. Yeah. Now, Army regulations allow the GI to take home one enemy pistol. I don't remember what we did with the burp gun. The house we occupied on the West Bank an hour or so later was located along the river's edge. The normally beautiful river view and the Erpler lay to the east beyond was obstructed by a dike wall higher than the house rooftop and stretched north and south about a mile in each direction, and maybe farther. Whoever owned that attractive house most certainly was part of the German upper class. Among other things were fine art contents of the house, the furnishings including a grand piano. Peering over the dike wall, we could observe swarms of German soldiers on the other bank, some 1,200 or more feet away. Also in clear view to the south, about 4,000 feet from our location, we saw the full superstructure of the Ludendorff Bridge, an awesome sight of heavy steel members and its massive concrete castle-like towers on both ends, east and west. Weeks earlier, our guys were speculating, what if American troops captured a bridge on the Rhine, still standing? Like a dream come true, we were witnessing just that. During a previous night's sleep, I had a dream that a big bridge over the Rhine River was captured intact. One of my buddies told me he had a similar dream. Subtitle, 9th Armored Heroes. Personnel from the 9th Armored Division were about to attempt the unbelievable feat of cutting the wires connected to the main charge of explosives designed by the Germans to blow the bridge into the Rhine River under extremely heavy enemy fire from the east bank. Men of the 9th Armored, both infantry and engineers, ran to the bridge's middle span, where an engineer cut the wires before the Nazi soldier could detonate the charge from his wired box on the other side of the river. It later was revealed that the plunger on the detonator box was pushed several times, but failed to set off the explosion. There are published historical articles stating that the high-level German officer who was responsible for directing the detonation at 5:20 p.m. on March 7th, 1945, was executed later by order of the Nazi High Regime, or High Command, along with 4 other officers. While enjoying our all too brief stay at the well-furnished house at the north of Remagen, we experienced an unusual happening. A U.S. Army Jeep, this Army Jeep with 4 soldiers, was approaching us from the south at high speed on the dike top roadway. Germans from across the water were spraying bullets at the 4 men. The Jeep driver attempted to turn sharply away from the river and the exposed roadway onto a narrow strip that separated our backyard from the neighbors, so to speak. Anxious to avoid the hail of fire, he turned hard and flipped over into the yard we occupied, a drop of about 10 feet from the top of the dike. To everyone's amazement, the men were not seriously injured. They had managed to hold on and were protected by the machine gun mount, a steel post welded or bolted to the Jeep floor. It acted similar to a roll bar, hitting the ground first, with the Jeep turning over completely and then landing back on its 4 wheels. During the rollover, the crew was thrown clear and incurring only a few minor injuries. The men and the Jeep were in good enough shape to drive out of the yard, but they chose a different exit, not to leave via the dike's top. Crossing under heavy fire. Establishing a bridgehead on the east bank became the immediate order of business on March 9th. As lead elements of the rest of the 9th Infantry were arriving in order to fight their way over the bridge, with soldiers from the 78th Infantry Division alongside them to assist the 9th Armored Division. Casualties were heavy, but the bridgehead had to be held. More U.S. troops and armament were pulling into town, and roads to Remagen were rapidly developing colossal traffic jams, with serious congestion hampering the additional divisions trying to make their way across. All events were under incessant and concentrated artillery fire, or barrages of and periodic strafing bombing attacks, as the Luftwaffe desperately roared in on the giant steel structure that linked the west and east banks of the mighty Rhine River, inflicting major casualties upon the U.S. troops. In the first 24 hours, 8,000 American Army personnel crossed over the massive steel structure to the east bank, as mentioned. Our mission, after moving down to the West Tower, was to help supply our infantry fighting on the other side. On March 8th, I was told to grab 2 steel boxes of 30 caliber machine gun ammo and cross over. I think I broke my personal best record for the distance in running flat out for the full 1,500 feet or more. Wounded GIs were already bandaged, so I did not stop to render aid. Still under small arms fire and heavy artillery bursts, and with earlier orders to come back if possible, I set out for the west end of the bridge. That return trip had major obstacles to face, and my elapsed time was more than double what it had been going the other way. It was a struggle getting through the twisted structural steel members, where very recent shelling had ripped and reshaped the columns, girders, and struts into sharp and jagged obstacles. My uniform was badly torn, and my right hand was cut on this jagged steel, but making it back to the protection of the West Tower was my ultimate objective. Subtitle, All Night Under the Bridge. That night, instead of taking more ammo across, I was voluntarily assigned, along with another man, who refused orders to go until convinced by one of our officers, to go back out on the bridge and climb down almost to the water level to stand watch. My fellow volunteer, and that's in parentheses, volunteer, needed a lot of mental support. His demeanor bordering on insubordination in carrying out this horror of horrors, making the assignment more trying for me. I had my own strong reluctance to overcome. We climbed down and stood between the flanges of a massive steel column that rested on one of several large concrete pilings, about a third of the way from the west bank, almost at the water level. Our duty was to watch for German commando frogmen. Word was that they would be attempting to come down the river from the south, the Rhine flows north, to blow up the bridge. That was another of the longest nights of my young life. The concussion and noise was deafening. With strike after strike on the bridge by many rounds of artillery fire, V-2 rockets were beginning to be sent in as well. The sparks and shrapnel flew everywhere. We had to stay there all night. Guys in my outfit pulled that assignment 2 more nights after that. Several days later, after my division had secured ground on the eastern side of the Rhine, 7 frogmen were actually spotted short of their target and were fired upon by the American soldiers on the west bank, forcing the frogmen to surrender. Subtitle, Advancing the Final Victory. The German soldiers' desperation and their pending doom were evident as the Remagen episode unfolded. This battle would definitely shorten the war by months. Norway had heavy water, deuterium, known as deuterium technically, which it was understood would make it possible to develop an atomic bomb. Time was surely the essence, since Hitler and his people had control of Norway's material. The Allies had to act fast. We were aware that capturing the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen would intact, if we caught the bridge intact, would significantly accelerate the pace of the Nazi Third Reich's inevitable destruction. The immense importance of the American army having saved the Ludendorff Bridge and the subsequent overpowering buildup of the central bridgehead across the Rhine was recognized in a quote from a German general, General Jodl, who said, "This action hastened Germany's defeat and shortened the war in Europe by 6 months." Now, next subtitle is Introducing the Jet. The first jet plane, I was informed later it was a Messerschmitt Me-262 that few Americans had ever seen, was flown over the Ludendorff Bridge several times by brave German pilots with astounding speed, while our P-38 Lightning fighters were constantly circling the site. They were no match for the relatively untried but impressive German jet. I don't recall the jet making a strafing attack, not that type of German plane, but I may be wrong. The jet's main function at that time, I believe, was to boost the sagging morale of the German military and civilians. One jet passing over apparently tempted one of our own P-38 pilots to peel off and give chase, but our Lightning fighter plane was left behind very quickly. No match in speed for the jet, the German jet. The next subtitle is No Longer a Bridge. On March 17th, 10 days after the Ludendorff Bridge was seized by the U.S. forces, the bridge collapsed, full length en masse, into the Rhine with a loud roar of relief, one would say. Fortunately, my comrade and I were not perched there under the bridge at the time. Most regrettably, however, the collapse killed 26 GIs. Many of the casualties were our remarkable and heroic military police, the MPs, who were constantly exposed to the artillery and strafing, but steadfastly directed the heavy traffic under the most grueling and dangerous conditions. That information is from the Oxford Guide, World War II. The next subtitle, Those Amazing Engineers. Courageously, the soldiers of the 291st Engineer Combat Battalion and other U.S. Army engineer outfits constructed 2 treadway bridges, or ponton floated, under extremely perilous endeavor, knowing the Ludendorff Railroad Bridge could collapse at any time. 2 additional treadway placements were completed prior to the final destruction of the main bridge, and several immeasurably in keeping the vital flow of men, equipment, and supplies moving forward over the Rhine River. During the early stage of establishing the East Bank bridgehead, powerful searchlights were employed, creating what we would refer to as the artificial moonlight. The units would cast their 13 million candle power beams onto the Erpler Lay hillside east of the river and beyond, helping our troops to detect the location of the opposing German forces. The illumination improved the effectiveness and the morale of most of our American soldiers. But for the German fighters' morale, it most likely lowered it further. The 9th Infantry takes command of the bridgehead. My outfit, commanded by Colonel David, in Colonel David E. Pergrin's book, First Across the Rhine, the story of the 291st Engineer Combat Battalion, as he points out, on March 9th, 1945, Brigadier General William Hodge of the 9th Armored Division turned over command of the bridgehead to the 9th Infantry Division Major General Louis Craig, who set up his CP, or command post, in Erpel. In the first 24 hours, as mentioned before, 8,000 American soldiers had crossed over the bridge, a span of about 400 yards. Our 9th Infantry and 78th Infantry, plus other U.S. Army divisions by now, March 9th, were facing the German 11th SS Panzer Army and the 9th Panzerlehr Division and the 3rd Parachute Division of the German forces on the eastern side of the Rhine, according to General Pergrin. Breaking out from the Rhine River bridgehead could become another difficult task as part of the Rhineland campaign. On March 11, 1945, a famous war correspondent and writer for the Stars and Stripes military newspaper, Andy Rooney, the same conversant and entertaining Andy Rooney of television's 60 Minutes, wrote the excerpt that follows. Luftwaffe pilots are apparently operating under the suicide orders to get the bridge, and the bridgehead scene is spectacular. Vehicles creep over the tread-like span of at the enforced 5 miles per hour speed. Rooney's further observation was that the eggs dropped out of the plane bomb racks slowly, it seems, and fall towards the river. And aircraft gunners claimed 4 destroyed of the first 4 German planes which came over the area. He went on to describe what followed. The 2 charges, which went off just before the first patrol arrived on Wednesday, caused slight damage, but engineers quickly got to the bridge and cut wires leading to more than a ton of dynamite and dumped the demolition charges into the river. Chapter 14 coming up.
Good, stop. Go.